Welcome back to the football podcast from WePlayStrong. In this episode, we're looking at the subject of online abuse and the impact it has on people's lives. Online abuse is an increasing issue in society and in football. We're going to talk about the effect it has, the need for victims to be recognized and supported, how top players deal with the issue on a daily basis, and why UEFA campaigns like #RealScars are vital to tackling this issue. Join the conversation online and tell us your thoughts using the hashtag #RealScars and the Football Podcast. My name is Hehakaija and I am your host. Joining us is Birmingham City and Republic of Ireland forward Lucy Quinn, and former England and Aston Villa defender and newly appointed Bristol City coach Anita Asante. Welcome and thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. I'm just working hard in pre-season in the heat, but yeah, no, it's going well.
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you, Rocky. Just, kicking off a lot of football action with the Euros, punditry stuff, which has been amazing. And obviously my new appointment as a coach at Bristol with Lauren Smith, I'm really excited about. So yeah, looking forward to that.
So let's get this started, because now we know that this is a deeply personal topic of conversation and it takes a lot of strength and courage to talk about it. So I'd like to start by asking both of you about your personal experiences of online abuse. And so Lucy, let's start with you. Have you suffered online abuse, and are you able to share the context of that?
Yeah, I did. I did have one occasion where I felt like some online abuse was personally directed at me, as in I was tagged in the comment. Whereas before, I think I'd only ever seen general stuff that was under posts that maybe I was in or posts that my team had posted. So I have to say that I have been fairly lucky. I have seen teammates and friends suffer a lot worse. But on one occasion, there was just random Instagram and Twitter comments about not having a great performance, which is fine. That's someone's opinion. But then it did quite get personal with name calling and things like that. And yeah, that was something that kind of was the first time I was experiencing it. And I thought it was a bit strange because I thought it was completely unnecessary, as most of online abuse obviously is. But yeah, it is something that you don't expect to come off of the pitch and get on your phone. So it definitely wasn't pleasant.
When that happened, did you speak to your teammates about that?
No, I don't think so. At the time, I didn't let it affect me at all. I felt like that opinion was completely unvalid. Obviously, they don't know me. They don't know anything about me and my life. I didn't know this person. And it was just something that I was just like, okay, if you're going to sit on your phone or computer and do that, that's fine. But I'd actually just played at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, so I was buzzing. I was like, I've just gone out to work and you've chosen to abuse me. That's your call. But then later on, I was having a conversation with my friends about online abuse and some things that they'd seen. And I just said, oh yeah, no, don't worry. That's happened to me before. You've just got to do your best to just park it and realize that it's a much greater reflection on who they are as a person than on you, because, they've just decided to go and put that out in the world when it really wasn't needed at all. So then it was spoken about a little. But other than that, I didn't feel like I really needed to speak to anyone or get it off my chest.
Like Lucy said, I've definitely experienced it. But, I also feel quite fortunate that I haven't had the kind of wave of torrent of abuse that some players have had and former players have had and experienced on online platforms. Because I think when you get it in silos and isolated incidences, you probably handle it a little bit better. Like Lucy said, if it's one person, Billy Nobody, you can kind of brush it off. But if it's like a torrent of abuse and it's so instant, that can obviously affect you much deeper. And I've actually just experienced something similar to that quite recently after releasing an article in the press about diversity in football. And, I just knew, I almost expected it, that I was going to get a wave of some people abusing me related to this subject. But they weren't even concerned about reading kind of the content of what I was putting out there. They were already at the headline, trying to kill me because of this headline, which, by the way, I didn't decide on. But that's another thing. But for me, I just felt like you're so used to it as a woman, I think, on online platforms, getting some form of abuse, whether it's misogyny, sexism, racism, homophobia, that we kind of just expect it now, and we find the best methods we have to deal with it or brush it off. And normally I'm quite good at handling these kinds of circumstances, but in this instance, it actually did bother me a little bit, and I did feel like I had to talk to my partner about it, and I did have to talk to my agent and, you know, the editors at the paper about it as well, because I just was like, you know, this is my first real experience of getting this kind of wave of abuse. I can only imagine what it feels like for others who get it all the time, or, you know, even if they experienced it once, how that can be detrimental to their kind of mental health as well.
You already knew by speaking about this topic, and I totally understand where you're coming from. If you say like, okay, we're talking about diversity and inclusion, did that add any extra stress for you, or how did that work for you?
Yeah, it did add a little bit of stress. I think for me, it's, you know, that when you're challenging something that isn't necessarily the popular opinion, you're going to get some form of backlash. But it's kind of, it makes you question whether or not you should keep doing it, you know, or you should keep speaking out, or whether you should, is it worth that kind of energy as well, that you're going to receive that kind of, it takes energy from you mentally, I think, to constantly be challenged negatively by people who sit behind anonymous accounts, in particular, distributing, targeting abuse at individuals, you know. But then again, at the same time, I think about it and I'm like, no, it's totally worth it. It's worth it just to get people like this off these platforms and to draw them out, basically, because and it makes it, and it re-emphasizes how much of an issue it is and why it's still important, actually.
Have you ever responded to online abuse, Lucy? Have you ever been tempted to say something back?
I've definitely been tempted. Definitely been tempted. But I think that's kind of letting them win. Obviously, we're professionals at the end of the day, and you're never going to get into an argument or sink to the level of someone that's throwing abuse at you and throw it back their way. But equally, sometimes you do just want to say, well, actually, this is what I meant by that, or this was taken out of context, for example. But again, I think you shouldn't have to explain yourself. If I've posted a picture on Instagram with a certain caption, for example, then yeah, maybe I am a bit upset that the season hasn't gone the way that we wanted, but I still had good times. So there's definitely been times that I've been tempted, but I think I've always just taken a deep breath and just reminded myself, you know, that's not going to achieve anything, and you don't have to explain yourself, really.
Yeah, and does it also, are you also just the one that just shuts her phone down, or is it just like, you know what, I'm just going to ignore it, I'm not even going to look at these accounts, I'm not going to read these comments?
Yeah, no, it's not something that I ever go looking for, but sometimes obviously if you're tagged in it, then you get a notification, or if it's under a post or a tweet of yours. But it's definitely something that I've just been, you know, I've been able to shut off, and I feel, again, like I've been quite lucky like that. I don't know, maybe I've got a little bit of a thick skin, and maybe we are just used to it being female athletes, which should never be the case. But I am able to just put that to the side, and like I said, just remind myself that that's a reflection of how they are as a human being, and I'm not going to sink to that level. But, you know, I definitely think that there are friends of mine and players that aren't able to just shut that away, put it in a box and ignore it. And I think that's why it's really important to keep speaking on it and acting so that we can stop it, really, because it's just unnecessary and it does affect people.
And Anita, do you feel the same about that? Are you able to shut it off, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, I think for the most part, Rocky, I am able to just let it go. And I think that's partly because my generation of players, when we came into the game, social media was not the big thing. You know, I got to play a large part of my career when social media wasn't something that we were largely using or interacting with. So this is more of a modern phenomenon for this new generation of players. And so I can kind of like park it and not really worry about it. But at the same time, I think it's important for people to recognize that because the way technology has evolved and the game has evolved, players are utilizing it, getting the opportunity for fans to interact with them on a deeper, closer level, and their personalities. And also, it's the phone thing is, it's addictive. I don't think we can deny that, these technology companies, they make it so it is addictive, so that people want to engage constantly, that people are checking their notifications on Instagram and all of these other platforms. So you can't necessarily, it's not really fair to the users who are being abused either, because they never go in there with the intention of provoking anyone. There are just people that use the platforms in the worst way possible. But yeah, I've found a way to just kind of let it, recognize. I always tell myself, especially with Twitter, it's just a very small percentage of the population that are on this platform. So actually, their opinions are not valid. It's not reflective of the whole country, let alone, your constituency. So like, it's if you can kind of frame it in that way for yourself, sometimes it's easier to let go. But like I said, I do know that it is tough, and it is getting harder for so many young players and young people in general who utilize it and they try to utilize it in the most positive way, but have to deal with this kind of abuse on a day-to-day basis, because it's literally taking bullying from the playground to online platforms, and it's instant and it's in your face.
But also, just on that as well, I'm a player at the minute, so I feel like sometimes it's unprofessional to get into those kind of back and forths with someone that may be abusive or, just negatively talking about women's football. But then I also do agree with the fact that, although I said that I have a strict rule of myself that I never reply or I never engage, there are people in the women's media or in the women's game that are in different positions that are really trailblazing women working in media, women working on blogs for men's football and women's football. And sometimes something needs to be said. And I think that, if we were just to always ignore it and never say anything and never confront it, then that culture is never going to change. And what we're trying to do in society is actually prove that women can have the same jobs as men. They can speak about football, just like men can do what they'd like to do. They can dance, they can cook. And I think sometimes if it's never met with, actually, this large part of society don't agree with you in your negative comments, then they're never going to change their mindset. So although personally I think sometimes, don't get into it, there are a group of women, especially in football, at the minute, that are standing up on TV and social media and saying, we are here, we're not going anywhere, and we're not going to take your shit.
Yeah.
And that's the way that it should be.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. And both of you spoke about other players, teammates that who have had experience, who have experienced more impact of that online abuse. Can you maybe have you seen what level of impact that has on that teammate? I think both of you said that, but maybe you, Lucy?
I think I've been in the changing room with people that have maybe received comments that are more personal, maybe about their looks, or, for example, something a lot more specific to that person rather than just a football opinion. Oh, you didn't play very well, or you missed that shot and you should have scored. I think that's a bit easier to brush off, because you're like, well, I don't think you would have scored that sat at home on the sofa, or football is opinion. But I think when you're personally attacking someone for the way they look, or for their sexual orientation, or for their race, like, that's just when it is more negative in someone's own mind, I believe, because that's something they can't change. That's the way that they are. And I think that's probably affected people that I've been in the dressing room with more. And yeah, it's probably made people delete social media. It's probably made people very quiet or need to go and speak to someone. And obviously, as friends, you try and rally around that person, but unfortunately, you can't erase that memory that they've just suffered someone saying that about them. And people can delete social media or take time away from it because it is more accessible to just abuse someone online. But I don't think that's the solution, because social media has also done so much for women's football and so many things. So that, for me, is just a temporary solution.
I've been in changing rooms of players in the past, and a former teammate as well who's now retired, who have experienced that kind of online abuse. And one of them received really inappropriate images into their inbox, and this is something that I think a lot of young women and girls can relate to. That, this kind of thing where people are sending pictures to them, and that's a form of abuse. Like, often we talk about abuse in terms of language and what people are sending out, but those types of images, the fact that males can do that and send it out there, is something that most women can relate to, and shows a wider cultural problem of, like, boys will be boys, and that's what they kind of do, and we've gotten so used to laughing it off, because we expect it almost, that it's not a big deal, but it is. And I think you don't know how things like that can escalate in terms of that individual's behavior who directs that abuse. And on the second instance was a now retired player who works in the media, who had to come off social media because of the wave of abuse that she received for comments related to the game of football. Very specific chat, and analysing the form of a team that season, and basically targeted abuse at her across all her platforms, to the point that she couldn't tolerate it anymore, and just felt it was overwhelming. It was overwhelming for her enough that she felt the best way to deal with it was just to remove herself from social media. And that's bullying. That's a form of bullying, by targeting abuse at someone to the point that they don't get any breathing space, and that they feel the only way they can deal with it is to remove themselves. So, I think people think that words and actions aren't always that significant or deep, but to a lot of individuals, it is, and it can affect their day-to-day lives and how they interact with people and how they see the world as well. And we don't want to create a world full of people who just become pessimistic about interactions with other people. But that's what social media can do, as well. So, that's one of the two examples that I can think of that I was like, this is a major problem, and it does need to be looked at and resolved, because a lot of people as well will experience these things in isolation and won't necessarily talk about it and share what's going on or how it's affecting them, because maybe they have the perception that, but I should be able to handle this, or I think I'm stronger than I thought I was. But none of us will really know what that feels like until we experience that level of abuse, where it's from thousands of people all at once. Most people don't experience that in day-to-day interactions. So it has a major effect.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to speak a little bit more about the campaign #RealScores and the documentary that's been made. But these are all topics that come back, go back into that documentary. And another question about that, because have you noticed more safeguarding practices being put in place at club or international level regarding to this?
I think now there is a more conscious effort to talk about these issues. I think in the past, because social media was still relatively new, people were still kind of learning about the usage, the interactions are like, and abuse has become one of the forefronts of these issues now. I think clubs are trying, at least from my experience at my previous club, to try and make younger players aware of all the options in terms of how they can safeguard for themselves. So whether that's switching off your comments, muting conversations, making sure you only have a small network of people and trust that you interact with on, say, like Twitter. So they're trying, I think, to make individual players more aware of these things, but I think we've still got a long way to go in that kind of education.
Like I mentioned earlier, I think it's a shame just to say, well, you need to mute your comments because you're getting abuse. Because you also want people comments saying, unbelievable performance today, or love what you're doing, or my daughter's a huge fan of yours, like what a fantastic role model. You don't want to miss out on that just because a small amount of people are ruining that. And I agree that social media is a business and it's money making, and they want lots of people on their networks. And I don't think enough action is being taken and stricter punishments given when you breach certain rules. For example, there's been a lot of talk of anonymous accounts already, and I don't think that should be allowed. I think we should all have to take responsibility of our accounts, just like we do in everyday life. Just like you go and get into a car and you have to be insured and you have to have a license and you have to have passed a test and be educated on how to use that safely. I'm not saying we need to do like a theory test for like Instagram, but if your Instagram is linked up to an ID or a passport, then there are going to be repercussions for someone who's seriously misusing social media. And yeah, I think that's something that more work needs to be done there, I believe.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I do like that, a driver's license for social media. Just at least to be able to identify the person who's behind the computer, to make it more, to make them think twice about posting that comment. Anita, you're in a new role. You just spoke also about a little bit about advice for young people, but you just became a coach. How does this play a role in being a coach for young people? Is this a topic that you talk to them about?
Yeah, well, I think it will be a topic once I'm in there with the girls that I will be addressing, because I think, so much happens on social media, especially for women's footballers. As Lucy mentioned earlier, social media has done a lot for women's football, in terms of awareness, people knowing when games are, where they are, raising the profile of the game as a whole, but also individual players. So players are very aware of how they can utilize the platform for raising their own profiles and sharing information. So that's the positive side of it. And I think I wouldn't want to discourage young players from doing that and being responsible, and also recognizing that they represent more than themselves. As long as they're professionals, they represent the club, they represent their families, a lot of people. So giving them guidance in how to use it responsibly, but also making them aware of what types of challenges they may face whilst using these platforms, we have to do. And as a coach, I'll have to do that, and I will want my players to feel that if they do experience any level of abuse online, that they can come to me or any member of our staff or the club who will support them the best way that we can, in this area. Like I said, I'll always keep trying to challenge it from both ends, both as a coach in helping my players, but also from the other end in challenging the actual social media giants with this issue.
Yeah. For example, if we look into women and in turn female athletes, why do you think that women suffer this at a higher level?
Well, I think women suffer this at a high level because of their profiles, and they're out there publicly. You're out there on your social media platforms, so you're easy to find and access from that perspective and target. There may be other players across the football pyramid that experience this too, but you won't necessarily have the same level of attention based on them. It's the same as in the men's football when it comes to racism or whatever. It's the higher profile players that you're going to hear about 9 times out of 10 compared to anyone else. But yeah, I think for the women at the highest level, that is the main factor, is just that they are public figures, and now a lot of players are household names. They're celebrities in their own right. So you're number one, you're an easier target, and you're easy to access across a multitude of ways and platforms.
I'd say I would agree with that. I think one, it's probably maybe people that are insecure or threatened by women doing something that stereotypically we shouldn't do. Like, for example, your standard comments of "get back in the kitchen," and you're like, well, actually, I've never heard that one before, so well done. And also, it's just different to what they're used to, maybe what they experienced growing up, and just that mindset that society is in. And I think that opens you up to a little bit of more being more vulnerable, because they're not used to that. Like you say, that's not a platform that we'd expect to see, and it's threatening. I also don't know if it's because you're an athlete, or because you're someone that might be big on social media platforms or someone that's on TV often, people think, oh, well, you've agreed to put yourself out there, you kind of have to handle this abuse. And that's something that I think the men get a lot in men's football. Oh, well, you make all this money, you've signed up for this. No one signed up for that. It doesn't say in my football contract. I enjoy playing football. I'd love it to pay the bills. Also, I agree to take all this unsolicited abuse. So I think that's also what it is. People just assuming, well, you've put yourself out there, you've put yourself on social media and on the TV and in the public eye, you have to deal with it, when obviously we know that that's not the case.
It's also this idea of sport was made for men. I mean, that's the fundamental foundation that in terms of society and culture and where this whole thing has come from. So women being in this space now is like a threat to the thing that they've always owned. There's a space for them where they can go and be, do you know what I mean, aggressive, and they can shout and they can jeer and they can do all of this kind of, whatever, macho kind of behavior. So now that women are into this space, we're changing the landscape a little bit, and it's a threat to that a little bit. So I think that's also where it comes from. And the second thing is the constant comparison to men and women in sport, as though we measure ourselves off of men,
right,
and what they do. So whatever's the highest level for them, that is the best, and we just measure against that all the time. So, I think that's another reason why we get exposed to this level of abuse as female athletes, at the elite level and in general, is largely due to that as well. And that's the culture part that I'm referencing as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's and that's also, I mean, football is just also an example of society's thinking, right? So you can see that the perception of women in football is just you can just easily make that same comparison with just women in society in general. Just another question, Anita. So do you find yourself thinking about what people might say online before you do something in real life? For example, of course, that interview where you spoke out about diversity. But do you find yourself thinking about that before you do something in real life?
Yeah, I mean, I always think, and I think that's what people should be doing. I think the problem is not enough people think before they go online and write whatever they write and forget about the consequences. But I always filter, through myself or through others, what do you think about this? Or how do you, and not into a way to dilute myself or to pacify myself. But the point is, I want people to engage with really difficult subjects sometimes. So the way in is trying to get to a level of understanding of where we're at and how society engage with these issues and bring them in slowly so that you can get that conversation and you don't get that people shutting it down straight away. But I think you have to. I mean, once you, as a player or ex-player, when you're a professional, you know that so much of what you say and you do is a reflection of who you represent as well, your club, your teammates, your family. So everything you do is going to have a consequence to it. And I think that's why I do think about what I put out before I put it out. Because whether you like it or not, we live in a society where you are getting judged to some degree. Perceptions are built on what you do or how you say it or whatever. And it's not to say that you can say anything you want, but you've got to say it within reason and in a fair way that is obviously not abusive and can be conversational. And that's not to say that you're going to agree with everything. I can disagree with others. They can disagree with me, but there's a respectful way to do it. And I think that's the main thing, respect in everything you say and everything you do.
Yeah. And how does that work for you, Lucy? Have you ever hesitated about posting something?
I'm not sure I've ever hesitated, but I think it became apparent that when I went from playing part-time or completely amateur football and I transitioned into a professional, my Instagram and what I was going to post on there was completely different to what I was maybe posting before. And I was never posting anything too crazy before, but it would just be more of my personal life, obviously more of maybe my time at university. Whereas now I'm aware that actually that's become a bit of a football space for me, and a lot of posts might be football related and career related, which is, I guess, not hesitating, but that's changed my outlook on social media and how I'm going to portray myself on social media. So if I'm out with my friends for a couple of drinks, I'm less likely to post that than a picture of maybe me playing the last game last week, because it's just become that space. So I suppose subconsciously it has changed how I use social media, or in the back of my mind thinking about what I post.
Yeah, no, I think definitely also when you increase your following, and then you also just get more thoughts about what you're going to post. We've touched on the increase in online abuse. There's also been research about this, that it is increasing. What do you think is the driving force behind that? Is it just increased? Is it just because the visibility of the game has increased, or is it something bigger? What do you think, Anita?
Yeah, for me, the fact that it's increasing is no shock to me. I think it's increasing because of the world that we live in today. I think you've got people in positions of leadership that aren't real leaders, governing countries, being able to absolutely make a mockery of democracy, and also talk in a way that is divisive, whistle calls to very extreme right-wing thinking in our society. Then it's going to allow people to feel emboldened in what they say and who they're saying it to. And that's just, for me, a reflection of what's going on in around us in everyday life. And that's just transferring to social media platforms, where now people who are on the end of it are more vulnerable.
I said to myself, don't go too deep here, Lucy. Don't start bringing politics into it. But I completely agree with what Anita's just said. I think more and more people in positions of power are standing and saying things that are just completely, completely negative towards a certain group of people, or like a certain country, or a certain culture. And then it makes people look around and think, oh, well, if they're saying it, I can say it. And I just think that's dangerous. And like you say, I think people that are supposed to be looking after everybody and keeping peace and not doing that. And I think that's slowly trickling down into society.
Yeah, and the weird thing about it is that not only the people in power, in these positions of power, are saying this, but also major influences on social media are repeating that message. And that's where there's also been some research about that there's definitely that social media is just playing a major part into that wave of online abuse that is just increasing. And that's why I think it's so important to also speak to the governing bodies, to all of these big companies of the social media that we've already mentioned. What do you think, because we spoke a little bit about this, but what more can be done? I mean, what action would you like to see happen, Lucy?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, I think that, maybe not everybody has a driver's license, for example. Not everybody has a passport, and I completely understand that. But I think there does need to be some sort of link between you and your social media. People will have multiple social media accounts on one device. So I could be on my phone and have 3 or 4 Instagrams logged in, and I could have one that's Lucy, the footballer, who appears to be all right on social media, and then I could have another account that I could just be completely anonymous and hide myself completely and throw out abuse. So I think we need to crack down on that, and like you say, if you're held responsible for your accounts, when you do say something that's completely out of order, then you need to be punished for that. And if I was walking down the street and I racially abused someone, that wouldn't just be a slap on the wrist. Hopefully that would be a proper punishment, and it's no different hiding behind a laptop or a phone. I think that needs to be the first thing that we can do to see change. I believe would probably be that.
So whilst this issue seems to be amplified for anyone in the public eye, the sad thing is it can happen to anyone, right? With a social media account. Also, if you're a high profile player, but also if you're not. So what would you say to anyone who is suffering or has suffered abuse online, Anita?
I just say to anyone that's suffering abuse online to make sure that they speak out about it, that they have, hopefully a support network, or I'm sure there are lots of different helplines as well that they can contact to get that support, because you're not experiencing this in isolation. There are like hundreds of thousands of people around the world that are going through a similar thing. And if you can share that, that's super important. But also, of course, you should still do it. You should still report them. You should still do all the necessary things to protect yourself, protect your platform and your mental headspace.
Yeah, nice. Anything to add on that, Lucy? She took it all away. No.
No, probably just to echo what I've. Yeah, she's just so good at answering all the questions. I just don't need to worry about it.
I don't know about
that. No, just probably echoing what I've said previously about stepping back and just trying to process that it's more of a reflection on them as a person than you. If you're just living your life and being who you are and somebody chooses to abuse you, whether that's someone you know or someone that you don't know on social media, then it says a lot more about them and what they're contributing to society and the kind of person that they are. And I know that's a lot easier said than done. But I think it's important to remember that, you can only control yourself.
I previously already mentioned something about the hashtag Real Scars campaign. If you're in the stadiums, you might sometimes see some information about that hashtag Real Scars. I actually just saw the short documentary that they made, Outraged, about online abuse. We've got some male players and also female players. For example, Rennie Renard speaking about online abuse. Also, of course, a very high-profile player who has experienced a lot of online abuse, about just even the way she looks. It's definitely, I think, a really strong and powerful film, not only because you see the players speak, but you also hear some people talking about the research that's been done about that online abuse. So definitely want to watch. But Lucy, how important is it that UEFA creates this campaign and wants to empower people to speak about this and to do something about this online abuse?
Yeah, it's massively important. Obviously, UEFA are a large organisation that everybody is aware of if they're following the game or following the Euros, for example. And I think it's similar to what we've seen happen with mental health in general, that it needs to become more common that you don't have to suffer in silence with your mental health, and that there are other people going through it, and that you're not in it alone, and it's 2022 and we can talk about it, and we want everybody to be healthy and happy. And I think that's something that's still got to change drastically. Even phrases like man up. No, we know that it's okay that guys sometimes experience issues with their mental health or whatever it might be, and that we need to speak about it. And I think that's really why it's important that UEFA and other organisations are doing campaigns like the one we're talking about, because again, you're not the only person being abused on social media, and it's not okay, and there are people for you to talk to about it, and hopefully in the future we'll see more things being done to prevent that.
Yeah, awesome. So important, right? Yeah. And Anita, how key is it that people feel confident to challenge and to report online abuse?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I think that's down to the individual. I don't think all people feel empowered to challenge anything in life all the time. You might feel, more confident at one point in your life than you do another. But it's important, I guess at the end of the day, to bring awareness to the subject, get people talking about it, get people comfortable, feeling like they're part of a safe space where they can raise these issues. And as you mentioned before about UEFA as a massive governing body, football can do so much for people all over the world in terms of it brings and unites communities as well. And that's the positive impact that football can have. But it can also create culture shifts and breaking these last taboos in terms of talking, being open to talk, whether you're male, female, cross-gender, will go a long way into improving the culture of the game. Both on and off the pitch in terms of social media and in general society. So, if football can lead in a positive way as a force for change, then it's always a good thing. And this is one way to do it, having campaigns like this that people can't miss and they're going to see, and it might just, speak to them in that moment. They're like, I'm going through this, actually, let me click on that. And they'll learn something or they'll feel supported is huge. And you can never underestimate these small things, or what we consider maybe small sometimes, the impact it can have on people.
We hope you've taken a lot from this episode. Anita and Lucy, thank you so much for joining us and for being so open and honest about your experiences. I'd also like to wish you all the luck for the next season and all of your new challenges. And if you are a victim of online abuse, please remember to check your online privacy settings and be sure to report any incidents through the appropriate social media site. Thank you again. Be sure to follow and subscribe to WePlayStrong, and talk to you soon. Bye bye.